We're living in a pretty wild time, right? Artificial intelligence can write essays, it can solve incredibly complex problems, it can even create art. And it's forcing all of us in education to ask some really tough questions about what we teach, and maybe more importantly, how we can possibly assess what real learning looks like anymore.
Yeah, that number is pretty shocking, isn't it? What if the vast majority of the tasks we grade could just be automated? If that's the case, how do we measure genuine understanding? How do we make sure our students are actually building the skills they need for a world that's just saturated with AI? And let's be clear, this isn't some far-off future problem. This is happening right now.
Welcome back to Simplified Teaching, where we make pedagogy simple. Today, we are putting one of the absolute cornerstones of education, Bloom's taxonomy, under the microscope. We're going to figure out what it really is, see how it stacks up against some alternatives, and ask the big question, can it even survive the age of AI?
So here's the plan. We'll start with the foundational framework of the revised Bloom's taxonomy, just to get us all on the same page. Then, we're going to bring in an alternative perspective with Marzano's new taxonomy. After that, it's time for the ultimate AI stress test. We'll see where all this research collides, pull out the biggest takeaways, and then, I promise, we'll finish with some concrete action points you can use in your classroom this week.
All right, let's dive in. First up, the foundational framework. Before we can really critique Bloom's, we have to get clear on what it actually is today, especially after its super important revision back in 2001. So when I say Bloom's taxonomy, what do you picture? Probably that old familiar pyramid, right? Well, it's time to kind of throw that image out. The old pyramid was like a simple ladder. You just climb up the rungs. The new version, the one updated by Anderson and Krathwell, is way more sophisticated. Think of it like a chessboard. It's not just about moving up. You have to consider what piece you're moving, that's the type of knowledge, and how you're moving it, that's the cognitive skill. It's a powerful two-dimensional framework.
And this table, this is the real engine of the revised taxonomy. It's not just a list anymore. Across the top, you've got your cognitive verbs, from remembering all the way up to creating. But then, and this is key, down the side, you have the types of knowledge: factual, conceptual, procedural, and even metacognitive. The real work of designing great lessons happens at the intersection of these rows and columns. So the big takeaway from Anderson and Krathwell is this very shift to a two-dimensional model. But here's the thing, and it's a really important caveat. That strict hierarchy, it's an assumption. In the real world, thinking is messy, right? It's not always this neat step-by-step climb. These processes are all interconnected. But even with that limitation, its influence is just massive, so we're giving it an impact score of 5 out of 5.
Okay, so Bloom's taxonomy is an incredible tool for classifying our learning objectives. But some researchers looked at it and felt like a key ingredient was missing: the student. The actual human doing the learning. And that brings us to a really compelling alternative: Marzano's new taxonomy. And the shift in focus here is a really big deal. Bloom's is all about classifying the objective, the task itself. Marzano, on the other hand, tries to model the entire flow of learning as it happens inside a student's mind. He brings in these absolutely vital elements like motivation and self-awareness and says they are the real drivers of the whole cognitive process. So when we break down Marzano's work, his core idea is this model of 3 interacting systems. First, you have the self system, which is basically asking, am I motivated? Do I even care about this? Then you have the metacognitive system, which asks, okay, what's my plan here, and is this plan working? And only then does the cognitive system, which looks a lot like Bloom's, fully kick in. It's a much more holistic view of the learner. The only real downside, it's definitely more complex, which can make it trickier to use. Still, its impact is a solid 4 out of 5. All right, now for the part you've probably been waiting for, the main event, the AI stress test. We've got these 2 really powerful ways of thinking about learning. But what happens when you throw a tool into the mix that can convincingly imitate the highest levels of human thinking?
This is the question that's keeping a lot of educators up at night. I mean, the top of Bloom's pyramid, evaluating and creating, that's always been our turf, right? The uniquely human stuff. But now you have AI that can write an original poem or critique a historical argument. So can it truly create and evaluate, or is something else going on here? I want to read you this quote from an upcoming paper by Artemova, because it just hits the nail on the head. AI lets a student produce something that looks sophisticated without them ever having to do the deep, authentic thinking that actually builds the skill.
It lets them skip the struggle where real learning happens. It creates, as she puts it, an illusion of understanding. And that's a huge problem.
This chart really paints a clear picture, doesn't it? Just look at those lower order skills like remembering and applying. AI proficiency is through the roof, which means students can easily just offload that cognitive work. What does that do? It forces us and our assessments way up the chain to skills like evaluating, where the hard cognitive lifting still has to be done by a human brain.
So, when we look at the latest research from folks like Artemova and Evertegan, the core finding is crystal clear. AI is creating this illusion of understanding. Now, the big limitation, of course, is that this field is brand spanking new. We just don't know the long-term effects yet. But the immediate impact on how we need to teach and assess, that's a 5 out of 5. We have to adapt, and we have to do it now.
Okay, we've got our foundational frameworks, and we've got this massive AI challenge. Let's put it all together and see where these different perspectives really start to collide.
When you map these ideas out, the tension points are just fascinating. Pretty much everyone agrees that thinking skills are hierarchical in some way, but here's where it gets interesting. Bloom sort of assumes this neat linear progression, while Marzano comes in and says, whoa, hold on, none of that happens if motivation, the self-system, isn't engaged first. And then AI just blows the whole thing up, creating a new tension by challenging how we assess any of these levels if a machine can generate the final product. The takeaway here is that AI forces us to shift our focus away from the product and onto the process.
Okay, that was a lot of theory. So what does this all actually mean for you and me in the classroom? Well, that brings us to the simplified teaching takeaway. We've boiled all this research down into the 3 most important conclusions for your teaching practice.
Takeaway number 1, and this is a big one. Frameworks are tools, not dogma. It's not about Bloom's versus Marzano. The smart play is to use the best parts of both. Use that powerful 2-dimensional grid from Bloom's to design your tasks with precision, but then weave in Marzano's focus on metacognition to make sure your students are actually thinking about their own learning process.
Second, AI is basically doing us a favor. It's forcing our focus higher. We shouldn't see the automation of lower-level skills as some kind of crisis. We should see it as an opportunity. It frees us up from grading basic recall and lets us focus on what humans do best, mentoring and assessing truly complex, higher-order thinking, the stuff that AI can only imitate.
And that brings us to our final and maybe most critical takeaway of all. We have to assess the process, not just the product. It's that simple. If an AI can generate a polished, perfect-looking essay, then that essay is no longer a valid measure of student learning. Our assessments must change to demand evidence of the journey, the drafts, the self-corrections, the justifications, the critical thinking that got them to the final answer.
Theory is great, but let's make this real. Here are 3 viewer action points, 3 things you can actually do this week to put all of this into practice.
First, take one of your existing assignments and map it onto that 2-dimensional Bloom's grid. Then, challenge yourself to move it. Maybe it's currently at applying factual knowledge. Could you add a component that pushes it to analyzing conceptual knowledge? Second, add a metacognitive wrapper. This sounds fancy, but it's super easy. Just have students write a quick plan before they start and a quick reflection after they finish talking about their process. And finally, run your own AI stress test. Get students to use AI to create a first draft, but then you grade them on their ability to critique, improve, and fact-check that AI output. You're assessing their thinking, not the machine's.
So, if you leave with one thought, let it be this. AI doesn't make Bloom's taxonomy obsolete. It actually makes mastering its principles more critical than ever before. We need these frameworks to be surgical in our lesson design so we can target and assess the uniquely human skills that truly matter. To ensure you keep receiving these research-driven pedagogy breakdowns, simply like this video and hit subscribe to Simplified Teaching right now. The next analysis drops next week. You won't want to miss it. P.S. Want to support our work? Relevant resources and affiliate links are in the description below. See you next week.